In recent months, a set of claims has circulated widely through podcasts and social media, asserting that the New Testament, particularly the Gospels, contains hidden meanings involving drugs, exploitation, and criminal behavior, and that these meanings have been deliberately suppressed by scholars for centuries. These claims are most often associated with Dr. Ammon Hillman and have reached a broad audience through appearances on shows like the Danny Jones podcast. Because these arguments invoke technical expertise, ancient Greek, textual criticism, and historical reconstruction, they deserve to be evaluated carefully, not dismissed emotionally and not accepted uncritically. This discussion is not about personal beliefs, religious loyalty, or institutional defense. It is about method, how language works, how historical claims are tested, and how responsible scholarship distinguishes evidence from insinuation. It is also important to note that credible scholarship is not defined solely by knowing a language or offering provocative reinterpretations. It rests on intellectual discipline, ethical restraint, and the willingness to submit claims to transparent standards of verification and peer scrutiny. When those standards are set aside in favor of shock, speculation, or adversarial framing, the result may be attention, but not reliable historical insight. In what follows, we will examine the specific claims being made, the linguistic and historical arguments used to support them, and why those arguments fail when evaluated using the same tools and standards employed across serious biblical and classical studies. Here's a summary of the claims Dr. Ammon Hillman has made on the Danny Jones podcast and related appearances based on multiple listener reports and secondary commentary, not Hillman's original words. These interpretations are widely disputed or critiqued by scholars, even atheist scholars and listeners, so take them as reported claims debated online, not verified facts. Major claims attributed to Dr. Ammon Hillman. Biblical origins in ancient texts. Hillman asserts that the Septuagint, a Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, is actually closer to the original text than traditional Hebrew sources, implying that much of what people think of as the Bible has been mistranslated or misunderstood over time. Jesus and drug use. According to listener summaries of the podcast, Hillman claimed or suggested that Jesus Christ consumed psychoactive substances or that early Christian practices involved drug-like compounds connected to ancient healing or ritual contexts. Interpretation of key gospel passages. He allegedly retranslated or reinterpreted Greek words in the New Testament, especially Mark, to assert things like the boy in the Garden of Gethsemane being a more sexualized figure, and the context being lost in standard translations. These interpretations reportedly veer into sensational territory, including alleged references to sexual or drug associations with figures in the narratives. Controversial characterizations of Jesus. Some listeners reported that Hillman claimed or implied that Jesus was involved in practices that could be described as pederasty or exploitative behaviors based on certain Greek terms and cultural contexts, the interpretations that many scholars call sensationalist or incorrect. Radical rereadings of Christian history. Hillman is said to promote the idea that mainstream biblical scholarship has overlooked or suppressed Greek influence on early Christianity, especially regarding language, ritual, and symbolic meaning. It's important to take note that these claims are widely disputed. Mainstream scholars, even atheist biblical scholars, argue that canonical texts were not originally drug-oriented, and that Hillman's linguistic interpretations, linking the word lēstēs with pedophilia, are not supported by accepted Greek usage. Critiques also emphasize that the historical and textual evidence does not support claims like Jesus being a drug user or a pedophile based on gospel texts. Some responses come from Bible scholars on the Sade podcast channel who directly counter Hillman's assertion assertions in later episodes, e.g. Dan McClellan responding to Hillman's claims. How should these reports be viewed? Listener reports and Reddit discussions reflect interpretations and reactions, not necessarily verbatim transcripts from Hillman himself, but we will get into those. Many people find these claims controversial, fringe, or sensational, and most academic communities do not support the alleged interpretations. So for the first claim, the Septuagint is closer to the original, predates the Torah, undermines the Hebrew text. What's wrong with it? Well, a Greek translation cannot predate the Hebrew source text it translates. The Septuagint, or LXX, is widely understood as the earliest extant Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, with the Pentateuch translated in the early 3rd century BC, likely in Alexandria. That means, even if parts of the LXX preserve older readings than the later standardized Hebrew forms, it does not follow that the Greek is the original. So here's the real mainstream picture. What careful scholars actually argue. Textual criticism typically says something like this. The Hebrew Bible existed in multiple textual forms in antiquity before later standardization. The LXX, or Septuagint, sometimes reflects a Hebrew vorlage, underlying Hebrew, different from the later Masoretic text, MT, which is dated to around 700 to 900 AD. Therefore, the Septuagint, or LXX, can be evidence for earlier Hebrew variants, but it remains a translation, and translations can also introduce interpretive moves, misunderstandings, or stylistic paraphrases. So the responsible conclusion is that the LXX, or Septuagint, is a major witness, not the original Bible, and not proof that the Hebrew tradition is fraudulent. Why does this matter for Hillman's downstream arguments? If your whole case depends on the Greek is the true original and everyone hid it, you can smuggle in almost anything by asserting the translator's phrasing is the real meaning and the later Hebrew-English tradition is cover-up. That's not how credible textual criticism works. What about the claim that Jesus and early Christians used psychoactive drugs, or Christos is a drug term, and anointing is really drugging, like, say, eyes and skin, as he says? So here's the rebuttal. Christos just means anointed, not drugged. The Greek Christos is transparently tied to the verb kreo, meaning to anoint or smear. This is standard lexicon level material, not controversial. Anointing in Jewish ancient Mediterranean contexts is overwhelmingly about ritual consecration, kings and priests, not coded narcotics. Hillman's move here often looks like semantic opportunism, taking smear, apply, and insisting that it must apply to drugs. But language doesn't work that way. A word's possible physical action, smearing, does not equal a specific hidden substance or psychoactive compound unless you can show that the term normally carried that drug meaning in the relevant corpus, and the immediate literary context supports it, and competing straightforward readings fail. That burden is not met by it could mean smear. So what about claims about specific substances? Hillman's claims about purple dye and snails. They don't bridge to the New Testament. Listeners often repeat that Hillman links Jesus and Mary to some purple substance, sometimes conflated with Tyrian purple snail dye, as if that proves psychoactive ritual. Even if you can establish ancient people used X drug, that does not establish A, that Jesus used it, or B, that Christos means it, or C, that the Gospels are cryptic drug manuals. You need textual evidence, not general antiquarian knowledge. Drug use existed in antiquity does not equal the Gospels are about drug use. Ancient drug medicine knowledge is real. And maybe Dr. Hillman is a specialist in ancient Greek drug use. But the inference, therefore, that the New Testament secretly encodes drugging children is not scholarship, it's a leap and it's irresponsible. The scholar McClellan's response episode exists largely because Hillman's argument pattern is 1. Assert a shocking hidden meaning, 2. Insist lexicons are lying, 3. Treat disagreement as proof of suppression. So what about the claim key gospel passages are mistranslated, e.g. Mark's young man is really a sexual drug trafficking figure. Hillman often builds a lot on Mark 14, verses 51 and 52 about the fleeing young man and related Mark material. If you'll recall, Jesus is being arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane, and a young man is running away, and when he's grabbed, his cloak comes off. Standard lexical resources gloss as young man or youth. You can argue what Mark symbolically intends, but you can't credibly claim the word itself encodes a trafficking scenario without supporting usage across Greek literature. Narrative context does not support Hillman's secret ritual story. Mark's scene is chaotic. An arrest, fear, flight. The odd young man cameo is puzzling, yes, but puzzles are not permission to invent a hidden crime ring. A disciplined method asks, what does Mark typically do with brief anonymous figures? What are plausible literary theological functions? What do early readers say? Do we have any early Christian interpretation resembling Hillman's? The answer is, you can find many interpretations, but Hillman's, this is literally trafficking, drugging, reads like genre-breaking eisegesis, forcing a modern scandal narrative into an ancient text. Mistranslation accusations often ignore that translators compare manuscripts and lexicons. Well, modern translation is not one guy guessing. It's committees, philology, comparative usage, manuscript traditions. When someone says everyone mistranslated this obvious thing for 2,000 years, the default hypothesis should be the claim is overstated and that the alleged obvious meaning is not actually the normal meaning. And what about the claim that Jesus was involved in trafficking, pedophilia, exploitation, often reading of boys, servants, etc.? This is the most inflammatory cluster of claims from Dr. Hillman, so it deserves the most careful and meaningful rebuttal. You don't get to manufacture crimes by selectively choosing the most scandalous sense of ambiguous words. Greek words like pais can mean child or servant attended, depending on context. So if Dr. Hillman argues pious little boy, therefore sexual exploitation, that's a textbook fallacy. That culture didn't exist at that time. Ambiguous word, choose the most sensational sense, treat it as the only sense. Real philology does the opposite. It lets context choose the sense. What about the claim that lēstēs means robber, bandit, insurrectionist? And, what about the claim that lēstēs means a sexual code word? Well, no, it means robber, bandit, insurrectionist. This is a key point because some Hillman framings try to turn bandit, robber in language into something else. Lexical resources consistently define lēstēs as robber, bandit, sometimes with the nuance of rebel, insurrectionist in the Judean context. If someone wants to claim it's a specialized term for sexual predation, the burden is huge. You'd need parallel usage in comparable Greek texts, and there are none, showing that meaning. That's not what standard lexicons and scholarly discussions reflect in the language. Here's the extraordinary claim standard. Jesus ran a child drug trafficking cult is not normal historical proposal. It's an extraordinary claim, and it requires extraordinary evidence. What would that look like? Multiple independent early sources describing it, maybe the four Gospels, or legal polemic accusations from opponents that actually match the claim, or a clear, consistent pattern in the Greek text where the only coherent reading is Hillman's. But that's not what we find. Instead, what people encounter is a handful of verses, forced lexical pivots, a narrative stitched together out of insinuation, and that's not adequate for scholarship. McClellan's rebuttal. The episode is a direct pushback. It's notable that Danny Jones hosted a dedicated response episode, number 245, with Dan McClellan specifically framed around, was Jesus Christ a trafficker? And related claims, was the Christ a drug? Even if you don't agree with McClellan on everything, the existence and framing of that episode tells you Hillman's readings are not being treated as mainstream or methodologically sound by working scholars, even atheist scholars. The claim, mainstream Bible scholarship is suppressing this. It's ignored because it's too damaging. The conspiracy is doing the work that evidence can't. When an argument needs suppression to explain why experts agree, it's often because the evidence is thin and the method is weak. Academic biblical studies is not a monolith. Scholars disagree loudly and publicly on all sorts of controversial things. If Hillman had strong evidence, you'd see journal articles engaging it, conference debates, philologists arguing details. Instead, you mostly see viral clips and podcasts, social media summaries, and responses calling it misleading or sensational, critiques that he is not telling you the truth. People used drugs in antiquity is already well known, and there's nothing to suppress here. Classics and ancient medicine pharmacy scholarship is full of drug discussions. The suppressed part isn't drugs existed, it's the specific sensational leap that therefore Jesus used children as drugs, etc. That leap is exactly where responsible scholars balk, because that's where the evidence collapses. A simple falsification test. If Hillman's method is correct, it should produce stable translations that other Greek experts can reproduce, consistent meanings across the corpus, and a coherent reading that doesn't depend on "trust me, the hidden meaning is X." But in practice, critics argue that his readings are idiosyncratic, built on selective senses, resistant to falsification, disagreement-proof suppression. That's not how scholarly claims survive. So the bottom line is that Hillman's podcast persona trades heavily on, "I know Greek, therefore I found the real story." But the rebuttal is not "Greek doesn't matter," it's "Greek matters enormously." That's why you don't get to cherry-pick glosses, ignore context, and call it discovery. The Septuagint, or LXX, is a major witness, not the original Bible. Christos means anointed, not drug. Neaniskos is young man, youth, not built-in trafficking code. Lēstēs is robber bandit insurrectionist, not a sexual cipher. Suppression is not evidence, it's a fallback explanation. It is also relevant, when assessing the reliability of any scholar's work, to consider patterns of professional conduct alongside the methodological rigor. Publicly documented disputes involving Dr. Hillman, including his dismissal from an academic position and a subsequent harassment-related case, do not in themselves prove that his interpretations are incorrect. However, they do raise reasonable questions about judgment, boundaries, and professional temperament. Ethical scholarship depends not only on technical knowledge, such as facility with ancient languages, but also on restraint, accountability, and a demonstrated ability to engage disagreement without escalation or sensationalism. When an individual repeatedly frames criticism as persecution or substitutes provocation for peer engagement, it undermines confidence in that their work is being guided by dispassionate inquiry rather than personal grievance or performative shock. This does not invalidate every argument Hillman makes. Arguments stand or fall on evidence. But taken together with the methodological issues already noted, selective lexical readings, disregard for contextual controls, and reliance on insinuation, the broader pattern does not support the picture of a grounded researcher operating within the norms of ethical collaborative scholarship. Instead, it suggests a posture more aligned with adversarial polemic than with the standards by which serious historical and philological claims are normally evaluated.